Max, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about how you came to Japan in the first place.
Yeah, to be honest, it was a random email that got me here. So I was doing my PhD in London, in the UK, and during the time, I just saw a random email advertising a 3-month research position at Tokyo University. And I didn't really plan to go to Japan before, but I thought, Tokyo sounds cool, so I applied for the position, and I ended up getting it. And I came to Tokyo University for those 3 months, and even though academically it wasn't the most useful time I spent at Tokyo University, I loved Japan, or I loved Tokyo so much at the time that then I applied for another 1 year postdoctoral fellowship, and I got it, and I came back to Japan for that. And basically, ever since I've been in Japan, so that was 7 years ago.
Oh wow. So what was the subject of your research then? So was that connected to the AI stuff that you're doing now?
No, before that, I was actually a physicist. So I was working on quantum physics, especially kind of quantum information theory. So people might know it from quantum computing and cryptography, but I was working on a subfield called quantum thermodynamics, which kind of studies how do you convert heat into useful energy. So essentially engines, but at the quantum level, so at the really, really microscopic scale. Like how do you build an engine within a single atom, for example? That's the kind of things that we studied. And then you also go into kind of what is time, or how does time work at the quantum scale, because it's kind of in the name thermodynamics. Dynamics means something's moving, so you need to have a notion of time, and an engine that doesn't move or doesn't change over time isn't really useful. So we also studied, okay, how does time behave at the quantum level, and how does that interact with energy and those kind of things.
That's fascinating. How did that the work that you did at Tokyo University, you said it wasn't the most useful time in terms of research, but what have you been doing since then? Is that something that has helped you to kind of kickstart your career in Japan, or are you kind of working remotely, doing your own thing?
Yeah, it's not really related to anything that I'm doing now to my PhD or any of the research I've done, but basically already doing my PhD when I was still in London, I realized I enjoy research, but I actually enjoy building products much more. I started my first company there, kind of an AI smart cooking app, essentially, just kind of as a side business while doing my PhD. And I really realized I love kind of the entrepreneurship, the startup side of things. And while I enjoyed my physics research, I want to do something much more applied and much more practical. So I was basically thinking, where can I use my math skills in the real world to solve interesting problems? And AI and deep learning was just about kind of emerging, or kind of like really having this renaissance at the time. And I don't know, when was that? Yeah, about 7 years ago or so. So I decided to switch kind of from very theoretical physics research to much more applied AI research. And at the end of my postdoctoral fellowship in Tokyo University, I then joined an AI startup here in Tokyo, and that's kind of how I kicked off my career in AI.
How was that working at an AI startup in Japan? Was it more of a Japanese context, or was it a lot of foreigners working as a startup there? What was the sort of working situation like?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. It was a Japanese company, but we were very international. So on the research and engineering side, it was basically 100% foreigners. The sales side was almost 100% Japanese. And I've seen that in a lot of kind of tech companies in Japan kind of play out in this configuration, especially in the smaller companies where engineering and tech is very foreigner based, and all the sales and kind of marketing and that is very Japanese. And it actually worked surprisingly well. I mean, there definitely were friction points, but I've seen it much worse in other places. So it did work quite well in that particular company, I think.
Yeah, I think I've seen that as well because the sales part, even if you can speak Japanese really
Yeah,
well, I think it's very hard to sell
really
to
difficult.
Japanese companies if you're not a sort of native level speaker of Japanese and if you don't really
Absolutely.
understand all of the sort of cultural context of doing
Yeah.
business here. I think it can be very difficult. But I wonder if that also the fact that all of the research team and the engineering side is mostly international. I've seen that at quite a few companies. Why do you think that is? And does that mean that there's a lot of opportunities for people who want to come to Japan to work in sort of AI or
Mm.
technology companies?
I think it's changing now a little bit. Like that whole landscape is evolving so quickly. Basically, when I got into it, there were no people with AI background. Like a very, very small number of people, but basically all the people who went into this field came from math, came from physics, came from engineering of various types. But it's become so hot that now, like university offer deep learning courses, AI focused courses, and people are now graduating with that kind of background. So I think that's changed the landscape quite a bit. But I still think even now within Japan, to be honest, the level of engineering graduates or kind of Japanese engineers, software engineers, is very low compared to other places in the world. I don't know what it is, but somehow engineering or software is not that attractive here to Japanese students. Again, it might be changing now. I'm not so sure about the situation now compared to then, but the level internationally in AI and deep learning is definitely much, much higher than what's going on here in Japan.
Yeah, I've heard that there is a bit of a skills gap. I interviewed a guy called
Mm,
Cameron, who works at a recruitment company, and he said that they get a lot more money for recruiting people in technology in Japan because there is a massive
mm,
skills gap. And
yeah.
part of that, I think, um, in my experience and talking with people who have worked at technology companies, part of the problem is that engineers aren't expected to be sort of full stack engineers in Japan,
Mm,
which is kind of it's more common in the United States, where it's like you should be coding language agnostic, right? Like you should be able to
mm,
use whichever coding language is most useful for the application that you're using.
yeah.
But in Japan, I think a lot of people get trained on what coding language the company uses, and not even just the language. They would get trained on a specific part of it. And I wonder if that's a way for the
Mm,
company to maintain some control over their workers so that their workers can't as easily be poached by other software companies.
right.
And I met someone who worked for a printer company, and they said, I'm a an engineer, but I really only work on this specific part of printer uh, coding. And that
Mm,
means that if another company wanted to poach them, they wouldn't really necessarily have the skills to work at the new
yeah.
company if it was not a very exact match for like the printer company that they're currently working for. So I wonder if that sort of desire to maintain control over their engineers means that it's very difficult for them to hire engineers in general because there aren't that many people with skills. But that doesn't mean that there's a lot of great opportunities for international people who do have those engineering
Definitely.
skills to come to Japan and get pretty good jobs where they get to do a lot of interesting things.
Yeah. I totally
So
agree.
from there, you said that you started your own businesses before and you got interested in the entrepreneur space. So what have you been working on recently? That's something I saw on your website you were doing some stuff in music and some other things. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been kind of a long, winding road to where I am right now, and it's been many different things in between. So after I was working at that AI startup, which was very much focused on business applications of AI. So I was working on natural language processing, and our biggest client for the product that I was working on was Nomura Securities, a big financial institution looking through large amounts of text. And for various reasons, I decided to kind of shift to a different company. A friend of mine he's been running a small creative studio for now 15 years. It's not really a startup, but it's basically a team of like 7 to 10 people, depending on who you count, who work on computational creativity. So using AI in design, art, and music, basically. And he had been asking me for a long time, "Hey, Max, don't you want to join? Don't you want to join?" And at some point, when I was a little bit fed up in that particular kind of AI for business company, I decided, okay, now it's time to switch over. And I had an interest in music for quite a long time. So I've been producing on the side. And then I just thought, okay, it makes sense to combine my skills in AI and my interest in music to work on that. And we were doing lots of different projects. So we were doing commercial projects, of course. That's what paid the bills. For example, there's a company here in Japan called Yusen. They're kind of like Spotify, but only targeting commercial spaces. So whenever you walk into a restaurant in Japan or basically any retail place, the background music you hear is almost guaranteed to come from Yusen. And we developed an AI system for them that takes into account what's the time of day right now, what's the weather at the moment, what's the season, and uses all this real-time information to give better music suggestion and create better like live playlists. So those kind of things. But we're also working on purely artistic projects, so working with performers and artists to put on stage performances, collaboration with AI and human. Like one of our flagship projects, which they're still running now, is called AI DJ, which was a back-to-back performance, human playing a song, mixing it, then AI taking over, mixing the song, and these kind of things. And from there, like, yeah, eventually wanted to kind of get back into more product development things again. And I also had a big interest in kind of self-development and biohacking, for lack of a better term, and understanding my own physiology. So 2 years ago, I think now, I decided again, okay, can I combine my background in AI, in music, and this interest in biohacking to start my own business, um, trying to use bio data, so biometric data, for example, heart rate data, sending that to an AI system that then generates music, soundscapes in real time based on that data to then feed back into my biology essentially and create this human AI kind of biofeedback loop that, for example, helps getting deeper into meditative states or using it during breathing exercises. It could potentially also be used during exercise to get you in particular target states because we actually react quite strongly to audio stimuli. So using that and having a learning system that really adapts to you and your physiology in the moment. And that's kind of what I've been working on for a while. And very recently, I joined a new project called Woven City. So it's funded by Toyota, and we're essentially building a city from scratch at the base of Mount Fuji. And I'm part of the healthcare team there. So again, kind of bringing some of this biotech aspects to that and really using this smart city as a test course for these new future technologies.
Wow, that's a lot of really incredible, interesting work that you're doing. So the music one is called Udemon, is that right?
Udemon, exactly.
Yeah, so I saw that on your website, and it looked really like an interesting application of sort of machine learning and AI, because I think a lot of people think of these things like AI replacing human work. That's
Mm,
probably the most common story that you hear about in the
yeah,
media about AI. It's always about,
yeah,
these jobs are going to disappear, these jobs are going to disappear. But I'm much more interested in how it's going to support people in not only in their health like you're doing,
yeah.
but in all kinds of different applications. So what was the motivation behind that? You said that you were interested in sort of self-improvement and self-mastery and all of that. Was that something that kind of just led you into thinking this, or was this because of your music background? Like, what kind of made you think that was a company worth starting that could be useful for other people?
I think there are a lot of different things that led to that, but kind of going back to your point of like how AI is being portrayed as replacing humans, kind of costing us our jobs. I have very strong opinions on that. And
Mm.
actually, one thing I didn't mention in this like background, I also published a book in 2020 about the importance of time off and why rest is actually a skill that should be learned and is very critical in the future of work. And one of the key themes that we're talking about there is thinking about the future of work. Currently, so many people pride themselves in being busy and are kind of confusing busyness with productivity. And yes, I agree, AI will disrupt the job landscape, but the jobs that will disappear the quickest are those that are built on busyness, right? So if you currently pride yourself in your busyness and you think that's kind of what sets you apart, then good luck in the future. I
Mm.
mean, it sounds very harsh, but it's also, I think, an opportunity because AI, you might hear different things, but it's not going to anytime soon replace our creative ability. It's an amazing tool for creators, but it's not going to replace creators. And the same is with empathy, for example. So I think if people use it in the right way, it actually opens us up to really focus much more on these creative and empathetic pursuits and these things that really, really make us human. So yes, it will change the job landscape, but I think it will also create a lot of new jobs and a lot of opportunities, especially for people who kind of focus on, I guess, what's currently more termed soft skills in many ways. So I have very strong opinions on that point as well. And I guess it then ties a little bit into kind of what I'm doing with Udemon as well, because it's really trying to enable people to tap into sort of more this creative side of themselves and actually also building on this idea of a rest ethic. Really, I guess everyone is familiar with the idea of a work ethic, but I strongly believe that we need to supplement that work ethic with an equally strong rest ethic.
Mm.
There's a lot of research on creativity and the creative process, and it's commonly broken down into four phases. So you have preparation, incubation, uh, illumination, and verification. preparation means you actually sit down and do the hard work. You understand the problem, you really get to know the material. But then comes incubation. You actually have to take a step back and let your subconscious mind do some of the work. Then illumination is like the stereotypical aha moment. And then verification, again, you kind of do the actual work and make sure that your insight was actually all that brilliant. But half of the creative process happens during time off, and it happens during high quality time off,
Mhm.
not distractedly scrolling on your phone, but it's really this quality downtime. This could look different things. It could be a hike out in nature. It could be like a meditation session or like some deep breathing session. But again, there's this element of creativity combined with the element of rest and detachment. And I guess all these different backgrounds sort of led me to believe that this is the right direction to go into. And biofeedback in general has really seen um, really a renaissance recently. It's been around for a long time, that concept, but over the last 5 years or so, it's really taken off in the elite performance community. So both professional athletes, but also elite performers in the business space have been using biofeedback. And now with wearable technology becoming more and more available, I think it's time to kind of open it up to the masses. And I thought bringing in that music aspect is something unique I can contribute to it, which no one else has done. And it also solves sort of the retention problem. Like meditation app, everyone knows it's useful, or most people know it's useful. All kind of well-being apps, you know it's good for you. But sticking to it day by day and following through, it's really difficult. Retention is super low for these apps. So I
Mhm.
thought, can I bring this musical element to not only make the protocol actually more effective, but also make it more engaging?
Mhm.
And that was the thinking behind that.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the conversation, and I just want to take a quick moment to mention that this podcast is only possible because of the support of JobsinJapan.com. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com. There are tons of jobs on there, not only in English teaching, but also software engineering, hospitality, marketing and consulting, among many others. Most of the jobs on the board do not require any specific level of Japanese, and you can get started in minutes. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com, and let's get back to the conversation.
It's so interesting that you say that because there are a lot of not only research in sort of physiology stuff, but also, like you said, at the high performance elite
Yeah.
athlete level. I think I read an article about this called "The Courage to Rest" or something like that,
Mm.
and it was about how many athletes the in the sort of weeks before they have a big race or something, many of them actually do go to like a mountain or something and take some time off. They're not running as
Yeah.
hard, they're not like pushing themselves as hard. And then when they come back to it, actually they're fully rested up. And I think we never let ourselves rest. Or, we often, even our holidays are too short, like the sort of 2 weeks
Completely.
off. I think I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's a good way to
Yeah.
work. I think we often need, a good few months or something where we're doing something
Yeah.
different, so that when we do come back to our work, we can perform at a much higher level because we've actually had that time to go, oh, actually, I really, disconnecting from it means I really love this thing. I really find this interesting again, as opposed to just doing it every day and then getting kind of sick of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to what you think about how this is progressing technologically in Japan as opposed to other countries, because I can see, having moved back to the UK recently, how many things are very different in terms of what
Mm.
technology is used. So in Japan, I've always thought it's a bit strange it's such a cash-based society, and
Yeah.
how cash is still, most places I would say only accept cash, and if they do accept credit cards or like now PayPay and things like that, it just seems like it's a lot more clunky, a lot slower. Whereas
Yeah.
here where I'm at in England, everywhere accepts cashless credit cards. You just beep and you pay and it's done, and it's so fast. So how is that progressing in Japan in terms of using technology to kind of remove friction from day-to-day life?
Mm. That's a really great question. I totally agree. Japan is very unique in that way. And like having worked in the Japanese tech industry as well, it's strange because there is so much legacy stuff still around. Like finance in particular is terrible in Japan. Like if you've ever dealt with Japanese banks, it feels like, I don't know, 30, 40 years back. They shut down over the weekend. Oh, sorry, you can't get to your cash because we're doing maintenance or something. It is really bad. Also, most companies still use fax as a very, very like common means for communication. And there's so many things like that.
Yeah, sorry
In
to
other
interrupt you quickly,
areas,
but I think when I don't know if you remember before. I think now it's Prime Minister Kishida, and before him there was I'm trying to remember the guy's name who was running for Prime Minister, and he had suggested he was the favorite to win. I'm trying to remember his name now, but I'm bad with names. But he had got a lot of people saying that they would vote for him, and then he said, "We're going to modernize Japan. We're going to get rid of fax machines in the Japanese government companies." And immediately he was out of the running, and like he lost all of his support, and he's not been heard from since, kind of thing. And they looked for the next guy. And I think that's the thing. There is a lot of resistance to modernization, and
totally.
there are good parts of that as well in terms of as a foreigner in Japan, not having all of these sort of computer systems for sort of immigration. It might seem like, okay, why can't I do this online? Why is this so complicated? But it does give you a lot more leeway in the sort of the things that you can do as a foreigner in Japan and not get picked up on immediately. I'm
If you're
very lucky
lucky.
because I want to come back to Japan to visit, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that when I left Japan, a lot of the stuff is just on paper, and it was just very easy for me to
Mm,
just file those papers and be like, okay, I don't need to think about this again. I don't need to worry about it. And then I can, if I come back to Japan, if there were, if I made any mistakes, I can probably just, go to the office and chat with them or fix it when I come back to Japan, as
yeah.
opposed to, getting flagged at security at the airport or something like, oh, you messed up your tax forms 2 years ago when you left Japan, you're in deep trouble. So I think there are some sort of like obviously I would want to have it modernized if it was my country, but you kind of want a government that's not particularly organized. It's an organized government is a lot more of a pain in the butt, I think.
Yeah. Although in the tech side, I've also heard like horror stories, so it's good to hear that it's been going well for you so far. But also on the politics side, I don't think I'm making that up. I remember one of the former ministers for cybersecurity or something like that
Didn't have an
came out
email.
saying he's never used a computer before because why would he? His secretary does that for him. So that kind of tells you a little bit about the level of tech literacy in those places here in Japan.
Yeah, I maybe let's not get too much into that because we could. I don't want to get negative about the
Yeah.
Japanese political landscape, but yeah, there
Yeah.
is a lot of sort of. I think maybe just fear of change, and I think that's quite common in
Mm,
conservative countries like Japan anyway, because sometimes change can be very good. There's a lot of things that you can change to make them better, but I think change in general, if you look at it from a sort of evolutionary perspective, most change is bad. Almost all change is bad, really. It's very difficult to get things right. And so once you have something like in Japan where they have these systems and structures that maybe they don't work perfectly, they could be improved, but they work, right? They're
mm,
functional. And getting something that's functional when you change things is actually incredibly complicated and difficult and can be very expensive. And
yeah.
so I think changing things slowly in many situations can be a good thing.
Yeah, I think also here in Japan, Japan is extremely good at manufacturing, very good at hardware, and that's kind of more like sort of like in software, kind of in this you call it waterfall process. You kind of go through one step at a time. You kind of need everyone's approval to kind of go to the next step. It very much suits the Japanese sort of like mentality, thinking. So Japan, like Japanese industry, is really, really good at that. But software, on the other hand, the sort of more agile work style only now starting to wake up to it. And I think it's kind of correlating also with this change. Like these things we're talking about, they require sort of more the software mindset of kind of software updates. And I think Japan is just still lagging a little bit behind on that side. And it's just not so well suited to sort of the more traditional Japanese mentality, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to something you mentioned before, is that you started a book about called Time Off. And I'm really curious what you think about that, especially living in Japan, where people
Mm,
tend not to take that much time off, and the government keeps on having to make new national holidays
yeah.
to force workers to take a day off work.
Yeah.
What do you think about how that's worked for you in terms of, have you taken long-term sabbaticals to kind of have time off? You talked about meditation and the music scene
Yeah.
for meditation stuff as well. Are these all things that have kind of come out of writing that book, or come before writing that book, things that have actually helped you in your work?
Yeah, so again, it's kind of quite a winding journey, but while I was still doing my PhD, I was extremely lucky with the people I was working with at Imperial College in London, just my professors. I basically had like 3 years where at the end I had to present my PhD thesis, but in between I could do whatever I wanted. And I could literally disappear from the country for months without asking anyone for permission. And I didn't realize how good I had it at that time, but it was an extremely productive period. And then afterwards, I went into this AI startup. I suddenly realized, wait, something's wrong. I'm busy all the time, but I'm not feeling productive, right?
Mhm.
And that's kind of what kicked off this thinking process for me. But again, afterwards, after I joined kind of my friend's company's creative AI studio, it was a more relaxed pace because yeah, we're doing commercial work, but we're also kind of artists. And I think artists have much more of the sense that you do need sort of this kind of creative input as time for wonder and time for awe as well. And then I've been working my own business. I've been kind of freelancing as well. So I always made sure that I have these deliberate phases of time off baked into my working life. And I know even though it's hard to do that, like as you said earlier, we're really bad at that. We kind of have this sense of guilt. But I know it's actually in the long term productive. I need that time to do effective work. So yeah, I always made sure to kind of have that built into it. But like coming back to sort of the Japan theme, it is very difficult here. I've been speaking so after the book got published, I've been doing consulting around this topic as well. I've been mainly working with international companies, companies like Twitter, GitLab, coming into like their businesses, speaking with leaders, speaking with employees, and helping them with this time off topic. Speaking to Japanese companies, I've tried it a few times, but it's very, very hard. It's very hard to kind of get leaders to understand or get the buy-in. And even if they do, even if they kind of conceptually understand it, what we've seen time and time again, if leadership doesn't model the right behavior, any initiative is almost useless. And here in Japan, it's really difficult, even if a leader kind of conceptually understands and actually wants you to come in and spread that message. They often don't model the right behavior. And then I think Japanese are even have more strong kind of feeling, oh, I need to be the last one to leave the office. I need to
Mm.
kind of, if my boss does this, I need to do at least that, if not more. So I think we really need to change kind of how leadership is thinking. And I like that you mentioned athletes earlier as well. An important part of an athlete's coach's job is actually to make sure that they're well rested.
Mm.
Making sure that they get enough training is one part, but the rest, getting enough sleep, getting enough downtime, all of that is actually just as much the coach's job. Whenever I talk to business leaders, I kind of try and compare it that to their job to like the job of a coach as well. Because if you're leading a team of knowledge workers, you should treat them like pro athletes. And one of your jobs is to make sure that they get enough downtime so they can perform when they're ready. And that's still something I'm still figuring out how to communicate to people here in Japan. So the book is actually going to get published in Japanese next year. I hope it's going to have an impact, but it's still something I struggle with to communicate it here. And it's very quickly you kind of get this sort of response, yeah, that's great, but it would never work in Japan. So I still need to figure out how to best approach people here in Japan with this topic.
That is very difficult, and I think you don't change culture overnight, but I think
Yeah.
you do have a lot of opportunity with people, especially I think the younger generation.
Mm,
They seem to be more open to that. Like most of my friends are a lot more open to that, and I think it seems like a lot of younger people, and I'm talking about people my age, sort of in their early 30s or late 20s, are more maybe I wouldn't say how would I explain this? It's not selfish. How let me think. I think maybe people my age, sort of early 30s, late 20s, they're thinking a lot about how they live their lives. They're kind of thinking about their lifestyle a lot more than maybe the older generation whose only real purpose was like, okay, I'm going to provide for a family, or like, it would be like the men would be like, I'm going to provide for a family, and that's my only job, and I'm going to work 80 hours a week because I'm the wallet of the family. And then the mother's role was like, I'm going to look after the children, and that's my only job. And I think younger people now are thinking more about like, well, I want to enjoy my life, and we've got too much stuff anyway. We don't need all this stuff. We don't need all this money. As long as I have enough freedom to go and
yeah.
travel and do things that I want to do. And I think younger people are definitely doing that a lot more than their parents' generation.
Mm,
So I wonder if that kind of thing is changing, but it's more of a generational change than it is a technological change.
yeah. I think I agree. It's definitely changing. I don't know if it's a generational thing. It's probably partially a generational thing as well. But you kind of mentioned as well earlier. I think the government is also trying to actually implement things and force companies almost to do something about this. I mean, there were cases like that Dentsu case, the suicide. Couple of quite a few years back already, and the government really started to like try and implement very strong initiatives. But I think over the course of the pandemic, even more so. I mean, we've seen this globally, sort of mental health and well-being are suddenly at the forefront of everyone's thinking. And I think also Japan is slowly waking up to that. So well-being is a complete buzzword here in Japan at the moment. You see it thrown around everywhere. Mental health, I think in Japan was so extremely stigmatized, no one would ever talk about it.
Hmm.
It's still nowhere near as openly discussed as it is in other places around the world, but still slowly, I think as a result of like the last 2 years or so, as a result of the pandemic, Japan is becoming a bit more open to discussing these things. So I think we are seeing some shift. I don't know how quick it's going to happen, but it's definitely going in the right direction.
I think so too. I think that's a good place for us to leave this conversation. There's so much more I would love to talk with you about, but we'll maybe I'll have to bring you back on the podcast another time. We can talk more about how much things have changed in between. So, if
Yeah.
people want to find out more about your book, about your music company, about your work in AI, where can they find out more?
The book is called Time Off. You can find it anywhere you get books. Got a copy lying here. That's Time Off. The illustrations are by an amazing Japanese illustrator, Maria Suzuki, so I can highly recommend it just for the illustrations. And if you want to find out more about anything else, just maxfrenzel.com and that'll point you to all sorts of links.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed that episode and you like what we're doing with Inside Japan, please consider going to iTunes and giving us a 5-star rating and sharing this episode with a friend who you think it might be useful for. As always, a huge thank you to JobsinJapan.com for sponsoring this podcast, and if you're looking for our other episodes, you can find them there, and keep us in mind next time you're looking for work in Japan. Thanks so much for listening, and see you again soon.